Good morning, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. So welcome to today's interim meeting of the Strategic Policy and Performance Council. And as most of you know, I am the council of the chair, the council chair, Sophia Eccleston. So today's meeting is intended to be just a briefing in preparation for our upcoming council meeting in September. So we will not take a vote today. I think Dan mentioned in our last meeting that we're going to, in an email sent out, that we're going to try these interim meetings just to give the council members an update so that you kind of are a little bit more prepared on some of the items that we will be presented with at the council meetings, and we'll have a lot of time to just digest some of that information. So I hope that as we go through this, you'll find it, useful and informational. And, just please feel free to ask questions as we go through some of these. We do appreciate that everyone took the time to be here. And with that, I'm going to ask our CareerSource Florida Executive Assistant, Kay Clement, to call the roll.
Good morning, Chair. Could you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Chair Eccleston?
Here.
Abe Langadin?
Here.
Bain Beecher?
Here.
Kylie Damone?
Present.
Robert Dole? Secretary Eric Hall? Secretary Siobhan Harris? Tim Henson?
Yes, here.
Allison Kenny? Joe Marino? Lori Salarulo? Vice Chair Patsy Sanchez? And Brian Sartain?
Present.
Thank you, Chair. That's the roll.
Thank you, Kay. We do not need a quorum for today since this is information only, so we will just get right into it. So today the council will hear from CareerSource Florida's Workforce Program Development Team and the Florida Department of Commerce on several policies in process. We will also hear an update on system-wide improvements anticipated this fall as part of Florida's workforce system transformation. CareerSource Florida Policy Analyst Warren Davis will provide an update on the 2024 through 2028 Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act State Plan. Senior Director Dr. Adam Briggs will provide a preview of a data presentation that the council will receive in September. And we will then have an opportunity for open discussion and public comment at the end of this meeting. So just a few open housekeeping items and reminders before we get into the presentation. Agenda packets were sent via email in a link. If anyone needs it, just let Kay know, she can drop it in the chat. If you wish to speak, please identify yourself by name so we can have that for our records and accurately capture that. And then we'll have an opportunity for public comments at the end of the meeting. If you're not on the agenda and you wish to address the board, please provide your name and topic in the chat for this meeting, or email Madison Frizay at madisonfrizay@careersourceflorida.com. And if you're joining by phone, you may announce yourself and then wait to be recognized. Please keep your camera on or turn on when you are ready to speak. So you can have it, if you have your camera off and you want to speak, please keep it on. And then please keep yourself muted when you are not speaking. And if you're calling in, it is really important that you do not put the meeting on hold during that call. So with that, let's get started. So at this time, I'd like to invite Senior Vice President, CareerSource Senior Vice President, Dan McGrew, to get us started. Dan.
Thank you, Chair Eccleston, and thank you, members of the council that are here today. And really, the goal of today is provide, as Sophia said, some updates on what we are going to be presented with at the September council meeting, and we're going to start out with some policy development updates. So, next slide, please. The first policy that you'll be presented with in September is a regional planning area strategic policy. As you are aware, the Florida Workforce System Transformation Plan that was approved by the Board of Directors earlier this year included a 3-pillar plan for transforming Florida's workforce system. The first pillar was alignment and consolidation, and that is reducing the number of our workforce areas to 21 for the state. The second pillar is system-wide improvements, and the third area is the designation of regional planning areas. So this policy that will be presented to you all in September really defines the goals and the requirements around regional planning areas for the state of Florida. And some of those goals, or some of the goals that are included in here, the goals for these planning areas are really to align workforce strategies and services to address the needs of shared industry sectors and employers across neighboring workforce areas. Also to align strategies towards significant populations, and ultimately to realize system efficiencies with neighboring workforce areas. So a regional planning area would be considered 2 or more contiguous workforce areas in the state. The policy aims to incorporate WIOA guidance, or the guidance from the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, which kind of requires regional planning areas to be based on things like population centers, commuting patterns, location quotients, labor force conditions. These are many of the same data points and criteria that define a workforce area, and where there are commonalities across workforce areas with those, this provides an opportunity to further align those service strategies. And then the last piece that will be included in this policy, we talked about this in the June meeting, but Senate Bill 240, which added some enhancements and revisions to the REACH Act that was signed into law and went into effect in July, does require administrative cost arrangements for boards that are in a regional planning area. So that will be outlined in the policy as well, as far as what are some examples of administrative cost arrangements. So that's the first of the critical policies that will be put in front of you in September. And that's, again, related to the Workforce Transformation Plan, specifically Pillar 3. Moving forward to the next strategy is the statewide procurement strategy. So related to Pillar 2 of that transformation plan, Pillar 2 is about finding system-wide improvements. But what, and those system-wide improvements can take a number of different kind of forms, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But laying the groundwork for those system-wide improvements, there was a strong call during phase 2 of EY's research that there were opportunities for the state to procure certain tools or technology for the entire state of Florida, thus saving dollars and leveraging the purchasing power of the state. So really what we're doing now is exploring the guidelines that would need to be followed when the state procures a tool or resource, really with the goal that if the state were to purchase something, how do we avoid duplication and ensure consistent use of that tool or that resource across the system. The goal ultimately of statewide procurement would be cost savings and also building a consistent experience, not only for staff, but also for customers, including job seekers and businesses throughout each local area. So our contractor provider, EY, who's guiding us through the workforce transformation plan, is planning to conduct an analysis of the technology systems that are used throughout the state and crafting recommendations for what types of things might the state consider for statewide procurement. So just wanted to highlight that for the board here. The next policy, I'm inviting Senior Director Daryl McCall to speak about, and this is an education industry consortium. I'll just kind of ground this in what we talked about in June at the June meeting. We knew this was a new part of law that came in that required the creation of education industry consortium by the local workforce areas. I'd like to invite Daryl to share, what progress has been made to date, on that policy and the process that we've been undertaking since June to have this policy ready for your consideration at the September meeting. Daryl?
Before Darryl.
Oh, sorry, go ahead,
Before
Darryl.
Darryl starts, I just wanted, can I ask a question on
Sure.
the procurement piece
Sure.
while you're on it? Because I'm just trying to wrap it, understand it in my head. So it would be this statewide purchasing for certain,
Right, so where there, one of the things that EY found during phase 2 is in a lot of cases, there are very similar tools being purchased by individual workforce areas.
yeah,
Different tools, but having a similar function. The other thing they found is local workforce areas individually procuring the same tool.
okay,
So the recommendation, for one of the things that we want to move forward with as a state is how can we leverage the state buying power and purchase the one tool that everybody could use?
okay.
So as we do that, how do we ensure avoiding duplication?
And make sure everyone gets it.
And
like
everybody's
what's-
getting it
So
and
that's what,
using
yeah,
it. Right.
okay, so that's the piece of, yeah, how does everyone get it? Okay.
That's what we're working through. Thank you
Okay.
for the question. All right, Daryl, can you take us away? Let's see, Daryl's connection may have just, I think you're back.
Can you guys hear? Can you hear me?
Yes. you're
My
just fine.
apologies. All right, thank you. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Madam Chair, council members. My report out is on our Education and Industry Consortium as required now. Ran through Senate Bill 240. It's now required in law, Section 445.07 of Florida statutes. It requires each local workforce development board to create an Education and Industry Consortium composed of representatives of educational entities and businesses in the designated workforce service delivery area. And the local consortiums are required to meet quarterly and provide reports to the local workforce development board. And that includes community-based information related to educational programs and industry needs. Our approach for this was, hey, we know we've got a lot of this already going on throughout both education and workforce. So first thing we did was, yes, we assembled a 19-member policy work group made up of 3 of our local board leaders, Department of Commerce, Department of Education, technical colleges, Education Association, Florida Chamber Foundation, Council of 100. We had industry at the table through healthcare, SHRM, Florida IT Council, Florida Technology Foundation, Florida Makes. We assembled this work group and we did a survey. So the first step was, hey, find out what's already going on throughout the area. We surveyed our local boards. 14 of our boards engaged, gave us lots of information. About 22 K-20 educational providers responded with tons of information on existing consortiums, advisory groups, and recommendations going forward. So that sort of started out the foundation of the work group. Over the period of a month and a half or so, we met approximately 6 times and kind of hammered out we looked at best practices. So Bruce Ferguson, CareerSource Northeast Florida, Julia Tatalu, CareerSource Palm Beach County, CareerSource Broward, Carol, and Rochelle down at CareerSource Broward shared with us kind of their best practices. And in many instances, what is going on in those local areas almost matches the law of what's to be created. So we felt really good and strong about that. We also looked at some data. We had Dr. Keith Richards from Department of Education share with us a new platform that's been developed that includes Lightcast, regional market information, labor market information data, along with education programs that are already being provided as kind of a good platform to look at. But what we define, and we're in the final throes of putting that draft together for the board's consideration in September, was we found a lot of businesses and education meetings happening already. So we wanted to make a framework really that kind of lays out, okay, who are the required businesses and who are the required education members, keeping it very flexible to adapt to kind of local needs, but then also assuring that all the right players are at the table. We also are developing a sort of a framework, if you will, kind of purpose of the meetings, key topics, to make sure that all the letters of the law are met. So we're developing within the policy, we're developing some ideal templates to go along with the policy. So template framework of reports, framework of proposed agenda possibly, and who's on that council. How this very prescribed in the law as far as who needs to be on that. One of the main topics that jumped up right away was the members of this education and industry consortia cannot be a existing local board member. So that was a challenge, I think, for many, because they're trying to recruit business leaders and educational partners on their local boards. So this is yet another opportunity for them to engage and pull in people, but it's, so that's a challenge. Some of the key items that were laid out, just kind of feedback from everyone, was, don't recreate the wheel, use what we can. We looked at different partnerships and things, but in this policy, we will define those business education memberships, the purpose of the meetings, and then also the requirements for those quarterly reports. And these quarterly reports will go to the local board for them to basically get feedback from this, what I would call a think tank, right? So they look at the data, they look at what the labor market's saying, they look at what educational programs are in their area, and they get basically like feedback from this think tank of additional industry and additional educational partners. So we're hoping to bring that to you at the September board meeting for your review and your consideration. And that's it. The two key things is it's really happening everywhere. This just kind of brings it into a formal policy, a formal process. And we want to make sure we meet the letter of the law. So I'm thankful for the work group and all the excellent input that we've had over the 6 meetings. And I'm happy to answer any questions, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Daryl. Any questions for Daryl?
And next, we've invited Cantha Moore from our partners at Florida Commerce, Florida Department of Commerce, to talk about the last policy that we plan to bring to you all in September. So just welcome, Cantha.
Thank you, Dan. Thanks, Madam Chair and council members. So our team is actually quite proud to be bringing this policy in for a landing. We've been working on it for some time. Our initial revision started back to the ETPL policy back in late 2020 to ensure alignment with United States Department of Labor Training and Employment's guidance letter 819, and it provided states with guidance on the training provider eligibility, the ETPL itself. And so back at that time, we needed to revise our state's policy to ensure alignment with those federal requirements. The need to do this was actually affirmed by USDOL when the state's 4-year WIOA plan was reviewed, and we got feedback that essentially told us that our policy was out of compliance. We were aware of that. They were happy with the plan that we had to get that revised. And so we've continued down that path since then. After that, the REACH Act required our agency to establish a rule that governed the initial and subsequent eligibility of training providers, and it requires Florida Commerce and the Department of Education to establish minimum criteria that training providers and programs must achieve. And so in essence, this policy will supplement that required rule once it is adopted. Now, the purpose of the ETPL administrative policy, which will be brought before the board next month, is to provide guidance to local boards regarding the ETPL, any related federal and state requirements, performance standards, data reporting, and procedures for determining initial and continued eligibility of training providers, as well as the programs and studies that they want to be on the list. And so it basically will make sure that the local boards have the requirements from a federal standpoint and a state standpoint, and it will transition how the state basically approaches that ETPL process. And so the way it works now is that it's basically a roll-up where the local boards approve ETPL providers locally, and then it rolls up into a state list that's basically adopted statewide. That whole process will transition to where the state will now lead that process, and the locals will have the opportunity to then either adopt the state list or have their own subset of that list based on their locally established criteria. The policy will also introduce the to be implemented eligible training provider list module that will be housed in our state's online labor exchange and case management system, which everybody likely knows as Employ Florida. And it will allow us to better support that state management of the ETPO process here at Florida Commerce, which Dan will talk about that a little bit more. So that's basically the gist of what that policy will accomplish and be a culmination of several years worth of work to get that across the finish line. So any questions about that? All right. Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Kianta. Thanks to Kianta, Darrell, and Dan. Are there any questions for any one of them before we move on? Okay, thanks, everyone. So next, Dan will present on the system-wide improvements related to the workforce system transformation plan approved by the CareerSource for the Board of Directors in Florida in February. Dan.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. And just, I mentioned this before, but the second pillar of the Florida's Workforce Transformation Plan is really around system-wide improvements to enhance the consistency and coordination among Florida's local workforce development areas. Overall, the goal in any system-wide improvement is to streamline the experience for job seekers, workers, and businesses throughout the state. And improvements, we provided some of this background in the packet for today's meeting, just so that we're all on the same page. But the improvements really can take the form of policies, processes, technology, or tools. And any improvement that we undertake at the state level really needs to be assessed by its ability to generate cost savings, improve the customer experience, realize efficiencies, or improve performance overall for the system. Just wanted to make sure, so some specific system-wide improvements that are planned for this fall. You just heard Kianta from Florida Commerce talk about the eligible training provider list application. And this is one that was brought up numerous times during the phase 2 analysis and stakeholder engagement, that there were really 24 separate processes for getting on 24 individual eligible training provider lists. So along with that policy and the module that creating a state application creates really a uniform process for education providers to get onto this list. I think that's very exciting to have that centralized application process by the Florida Department of Commerce. It makes that a lot easier for all of our education providers, especially those that work across local workforce area lines, and also opens up for job seekers or those seeking training, opens up a lot more opportunity to take advantage of multiple training offerings, not just limited to a single workforce area. So there's that opportunity there as well. And then the second, so our contractor EY is working on developing statewide contract templates. This is a definite system-wide improvement to have single contracts or single contract templates. The first two that are being worked on right now are on-the-job training contracts and individual training account contracts. Really what this does is for the employer that is working with multiple local workforce areas, not having to have multiple contracts for on-the-job training, or for a training provider that is working with multiple workforce areas to have a single contract for that can work across multiple workforce areas. This call for statewide contract templates was reinforced in Senate Bill 240, actually verbatim, to call for CareerSource Florida to create statewide and Commerce to create statewide contract templates for use here. So in the fall, planning on these items kind of rolling out, but you'll see more and more of this, and at our council meetings, informational meetings, and board meetings over the next year, you'll see more and more of these system-wide improvements kind of rolling out under this pillar 2. So excited to be able to move on that fairly quickly for fall release here. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Okay. Thank you. Does anyone have any questions for Dan? Okay, pretty quiet today. All right, thank you. So with that, Warren Davis now has an update on the forthcoming 2024 through 2028 Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act State Plan. Warren?
Thank you. Excuse me. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the Strategic Policy and Performance Council.
It's my pleasure to provide the council with an overview and update of the statewide Workforce Development Plan. As most of you know, under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act, or WIOA, which we usually say WIOA, the governor and publicly funded workforce development system must submit a statewide workforce development plan to the U.S. Department of Labor and the U.S. Department of Education every 4 years. We also have to submit a modification of that plan every 2 years. States have two options for submitting a state plan: a unified state plan, which is what we have right now. And the unified state plan includes the 6 core partners, including the adult program, the dislocated worker program, and the youth program under Title I, the Adult Education and Family Literacy Act program under Title II, the Wagner-Pizer Act under Title III, and the Vocational Rehabilitation Program under Title IV. Contributions to our plan are made by all of our core partners. This includes CareerSource Florida, the Florida Department of Commerce, the Florida Division of Blind Services, the Division of Career and Adult Education, and the Division of Vocational Rehabilitation. Now, we're in an interesting position with the REACH Act and workforce system transformation offering us a unique and compelling opportunity to shift Florida's workforce system from a unified planning approach to a combined approach. Dan spoke of some of the efficiencies we're seeking and return on investment, and this is an especially good time for us to invest in combined planning, as a WIOA combined plan would include the 6 core programs that are already in our unified program, as well as 1 or more required programs that are not already incorporated into the plan. These required partners include the Senior Community Service Employment Program, Jobs for Veterans State Grants Program, the Trade Adjustment Assistance for Workers Program, the employment and training programs currently conducted under the Community Services Block Grant Program, employment and training programs in the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, work programs organized under Section 6.0 of the Food and Nutrition Act, temporary assistance for needy families, unemployment insurance programs, employment and training activities carried out by the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the career and technical education programs authorized under Perkins 5, now called the Strengthening Career and Technical Education Act for the 21st Century. As many of you know, the planning cycle begins with an information collection request that's sent to us by the federal government, and this includes standardized instructions for all states. It is notable that a combined approach to WIOA planning includes narratives on the strategic and operational elements and program-specific requirements for all core and combined partners. Each partner that's added to the WIOA combined state plan agrees to promote coordination and collaboration by executing memoranda of understanding, infrastructure funding agreements, and other interpartner agreements necessary to enhance the operational efficiency and effectiveness of collaborative workforce development systems and processes. Participation in the operation of the one-stop system is required, as well as providing access through the one-stop delivery system to the services or activities carried out by the programs, including making the career centers that apply each of the programs or activities available at the one-stop centers, in addition to any other appropriate locations. CareerSource Florida, the Florida Department of Commerce, the Department of Education, and the REACH office within the Executive Office of the Governor have held meetings with the principals of these required partners, and we're working with potential partners to collaborate and develop the 2024 state plan. This, again, we are seeking a combined plan for this time. It would be our first combined plan. Some key dates of interest to this board and council. WIOA partners will work with the REACH office and the CareerSource Florida Board of Directors to obtain approval from the governor's office on this combined plan. The plan will be posted online for public comment. The draft plan will be presented to the Strategic Policy and Performance Council at the CareerSource Florida Board of Directors meeting this coming February. The final plan will be uploaded into the U.S. Department of Labor and U.S. Department of Education's online portal in March of 2024. The plan will be reviewed by federal agencies from May to June of 2024. And should the plan need any revisions, all partners will work together to make any necessary revisions and submit by June of 2024. So we know that this is ambitious. We know this is going to be a move at a fast pace, but we're going to work deliberately and intentionally with both our core partners and our the combined partners that are that want to partner with us in this new endeavor. So this concludes my presentation on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act Workforce Development Plan. I'm happy to take any questions, and I'm also going to drop into the chat for this this meeting a link to the closer look training that we did about 2 years ago on the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. That gives you kind of a high level overview of the unified planning process. And if anybody wants more information, Dan and our team, we're all available to provide specific information about the information collection request, what the ramifications are of combined planning versus unified planning, and to hopefully work together with everyone who has any interest or stake in this plan to make sure that we're doing all of the things that we're saying we're doing to transform the workforce development system. So thank you, Madam Chair. Again, any questions from the council or the public?
Hey, this is Brian Sartain. I just have one. Maybe I missed it, so I apologize if it's an obvious question. But those opportunities to align the goals and the initiatives, are they aligned with the sort of population centers, or are they aligned with the individual, the 21 different regions? I interpret this to be something where we're trying to consolidate the WIOA plan along, for lack of a better term. I don't know if that made sense. If you need clarification, please ask.
It does, and I'll let Dan give a little more input as far as transformation and consolidation. But one thing to note is that the required partners, they already submit plans under the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. We're just not collaborating closely with them like we do our core partners, like we do with our core partners. So they have WIOA plans, and now this is an opportunity to work directly with them from a top-down approach, so that they can include, so we can include them and they can include us in the strategic and operational elements of the plan. And we're confident that by doing that, we do exactly what you say. We're doing a better targeting of those populations and receiving and acting on the data around those populations. But I'll let Dan respond to that if that's not responsive enough.
And Brian, that's a great question, and I'll answer it kind of in two parts. So the first, as Warren's talking about the state plan, really moving to a combined plan provides an opportunity for our core partners and our extended partners at SNAP, TANF, senior citizen, community service employment program, and then the other ones that Warren mentioned, to align ourselves at a state level around common goals and common strategies to assist the workforce. I think what you find across all of those partners, whether it's veterans or dislocated workers or whatever, we're all working with people to get them employed, right? So the opportunity by moving to a state combined plan is to align those service strategies, align those pieces across those populations, so we're all kind of singing from the same music sheet. But the second part of that question that was kind of inherent in what you asked is, well, what happens with the state plan? The next step is that local areas create their local plans on the same 4-year cycle. So once the state plan is released, then local areas write their 4-year strategic plan that must take into account the strategies at the state level, but localize that to what's going on in the individual community. So what you see in those local plans are a lot more precise labor market conditions for the area, industries, population demographics, et cetera. So it definitely is a trickle down kind of process, right? But the authority of this board of directors is, when we approve that, when we brought that plan in February and approved that plan, that's the state strategy. And it's going to incorporate, kind of the broader strategies or combined strategies of more partners. And then the local plan follows suit from there. Now, the reality is at the local levels, working very closely with SNAP and TANF. In fact, those services are provided within our career centers currently. Jobs for Veterans State Grants, TAA, these other programs, these services are being provided there. So really shifting to a state level provides that opportunity for common goals, common strategies, common data elements that we're all looking at, defining the playing field and addressing it, and then making sure that trickles down. So does that, I think, combination of Warren and what I'm sharing, does that answer your question? You may be on mute.
Yes, thank you. It didn't really, that's why we turn the cameras on when you ask a question, so you can avoid making silly mistakes like that. It does address my question, and actually more than what I asked, because I didn't phrase it very correctly, but it's exactly what I was looking to understand. So I do appreciate each of these outputs having a global strategy with a customized local implementation. So to me, that's where all the work that was done in consolidation, that's where the connective tissue is. So thank you for the explanation.
You're welcome.
Any other questions for Warren? Warren, thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Now I'll introduce Dr. Adam Briggs. He will give us a preview of a data presentation that will be presented to the council at our September council meeting. Dr. Briggs.
Good morning, Madam Chair and members of the Strategic Policy and Performance Council. I'm happy today to provide a brief preview of the performance data that we're planning to discuss at the September meeting of this council. At that time, our colleagues from Florida Commerce will offer some of the standard information that they have provided at prior meetings, including an overview of labor market information, along with the July unemployment and labor force participation data. In response to requests from this council, these pro forma analyses will be enhanced by closer consideration of labor force data for certain target populations, including the 55+ age group, veterans, and Floridians with disabilities. In addition, because September will be the first council meeting since the end of the 22-23 fiscal year, program year performance data, both WIOA primary indicators of performance and the leading indicators of performance, will also be discussed. Finally, given the new requirements of Senate Bill 240, we will also address local workforce board letter grades in advance of the statutorily required release of the official letter grades for the prior year by no later than October 15th each fall. Next slide, please. In September, we will also be joined by Allison Chase, President and CEO of the Able Trust, who will share some of her organization's information on Floridians with disabilities. Her discussion will highlight comparisons between those with and without disabilities in terms of employment and wages, geographical factors of particular relevance in the context of service provision for those with disabilities, and industry-specific indicators of both growth and unmet opportunities for this population. Allison's presentation will offer some of the key findings of Able Trust's recent research. As we prepare for September, our cross-partner efforts will be focused on ensuring a complementary relationship between the data and information on Floridians with disabilities provided by both Able Trust and Florida Commerce, the goal being to provide as complete a picture as possible by leveraging both sources of information. Madam Chair, that concludes my September performance preview today. I'm happy to receive any questions or feedback from the council.
Thank you, Dr. Briggs. Are there any questions for Dr. Briggs? All right. Well, thank you. So on behalf of the council, thank you to CareerSource Florida and for the Department of Commerce team for work that supports policy, board-led initiatives, and data-driven decisions. So now we've come to the end of our meeting, and this is the open discussion section. Are there any council members that have any questions or comments at this time on any of the information that was presented today? Are there any members of the public who wishes to speak? Okay, all right. So with that, thank you all for your participation today. So a few reminders before we close out the meeting. As you know, our council and board meetings are co-located with the annual Workforce Professional Development Summit at the Rosen Shingle Creek in Orlando. This council will meet September 18th, and the board of directors meeting will be held on September 19th. I hope that you'll be able to join several of your board colleagues, CareerSource for the team members, and hundreds of system professionals from across the state at the annual awards luncheon immediately following our board meeting. Please check your email for invitations and information, and reach out to the CareerSource Florida team if needed. And with that, our meeting is adjourned. Thanks again, everyone, for your participation.